Hello and welcome to this performance criticism commentary of Luke 17 verses 11 through 19. What I mean by a performance commentary is I'm going to share with you things in my interpretation that were most clearly accessible because I internalized or memorized the story and then made discoveries through embodied performance. As biblical scholar Sarah Agnew often notes, performance interpretation of biblical texts means trusting that the body knows. I will witness to you what it felt like to have that knowing in my body unfold in light of this particular passage. So let's begin by looking at the story itself. As Jesus went to Jerusalem, he was going between the region of Samaria and Galilee. As he entered a village, 10 lepers approached him, keeping their distance. And seeing him, they cried out, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." Now, when Jesus saw them, he said to them, "Go, show yourself to the priests." And as they went, they were made clean. When one of them saw that he had been healed, he turned around and went praising God in a loud voice. He threw himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him. And he was a Samaritan. And Jesus asked, "Were not 10 made clean? The other 9, where are they? Has none returned to give God thanks except this foreigner?" And he said to the man, "Get up and go on your way. Your faith has made you well." As I was preparing this passage, I noticed outright that the story takes place in a between space. Jesus and the disciples are on their way to Jerusalem, and Luke has hinted throughout his gospel that the way means Jesus' death. I vocalize the destination of Jerusalem in a way that I hope sounds a bit ominous. To Jerusalem. We are also between two places that are not exactly prime real estate, Samaria and Galilee. And I let a tone of disdain enter into my voice as I announced them. Samaria and Galilee. What my body discovered as I embodied this story was the role that distance, physical space, plays in the composition of the story. As I voiced the passage, I noticed in my body the push forward and pull back of the lepers as they approach and don't approach Jesus. This insight became physical reality for me as I noticed the distance when they cried out, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." Vocalizing their plaintive cry made the distance clear to me and created dissonance with the many other healing stories where Jesus is right there touching the one who's healed. The distance intensified as I took on the character of Jesus. When he saw them, see the distance? They had to be searched for in order for me, Jesus, to see them. The physical distance between Jesus and the leper remains as Jesus responds, "Go, show yourself to the priests." I found myself voicing his response as a shout with volume, gesture, and the gaze of my eyes, all coming together to emphasize that the distance still remains. There's a persistence of distance. I find myself following that distance body intuition as I looked at other parts of the passage. I saw that different translations broke a key sentence in different ways. The NRSV says, 10 men with leprosies approached, period. Keeping their distance, they called out. But I felt the push forward, pull back dynamic my body noticed would be more clear if the narrator had to interrupt and clarify himself. So I just moved the period a little bit. 10 lepers approached him, keeping their distance. The effect of having the narrator having to interrupt himself puts him in the tension-filled moment with us. He's not rattling off an already rehearsed narrative, but is improvisationally bringing us along on this journey. He responds to us as things happen, and his impressions evolve along with his hearers' understanding. A climactic point in terms of the account happens when the lepers are not even in the presence of Jesus. They're on the way to obey his command to show themselves to the priest. I want to convey, though, when the miracle happens, their wonder and astonishment. They look at their hands, they're amazed, and I convey a sense that a social weight has been lifted them as I allow myself to stand just a bit taller. I am given even more opportunity to convey this transformation for the one who returns. I portray him as caught up in the joy of the wonderful thing that has happened. He's caught up so that he doesn't even bother to do as Jesus commanded. He turns back, getting caught up in that moment that Jesus had created. Even though this man is not directly quoted, I want people to think afterwards, well, maybe I did hear him, right? Praising God in a loud voice. As I describe the praising, I use a praising tone. Out of the overwhelming joy he has, he throws himself at Jesus' feet and thanks him. And I want to use not the religious term of prostrates himself, but a more spontaneous sounding term. He throws himself at Jesus' feet. At this point, I feel the narrator is finally inviting us in to identify with the man in his exuberance. Once again, embodying the story physically reveals the role that space plays in the stories. But this time, what is communicated is not a distance, but the closing of the distance. The man has gone from keeping his distance to being right there with Jesus. Something amazing is conveyed in this encounter, and we are right there at the moment cheering the man on. The narrator breaks the momentum of that identification, noticing, as if for the first time, and he was a Samaritan. So we see the narrator's surprise and confusion that the man who got it right is someone who is supposed to be wrong. Our identification with the man thanking Jesus becomes confused when we hear that he's a Samaritan. The narrator's tone conveys how odd this is. The hearer is pulled into a struggle. Wait, are we supposed to identify with the guy or not? And the narrator gestures towards the man, indicating the surprising aspect of his identity. He's with us, and he watches with us to see what response arises. At this point, the storyteller gets us to focus on Jesus by becoming him. And Jesus speaks. He turns in puzzlement towards you. We're not 10 made clean? The other 9, where are they? I want the tone not to sound scolding. He's imagining what celebration it would have been if the other 9 had joined the Samaritan on his journey. And then Jesus reminds us of the struggle the narrator earlier embodied, saying, has none returned to give God thanks except this foreigner? Same gesture, roughly the same content as before. Jesus, for me, does not struggle to understand as I try to have the narrative do. He is looking at us to see if we get it. He's inviting us to appreciate the foreigner. The physical distance that collapsed in the Samaritan's return results in a collapsing of the social distance we feel from him. Jesus is saying, do you see what's happening? Are you following me? He got it right. This kind of reversal also is found in the very popular parable of the Good Samaritan. Another Samaritan, right? I once heard a group of teens in the Bronx act out that parable, and at the end they said, the moral of the story is, sometimes people you think are scum are closer to doing God's will than you are. Ha! Jesus elevates the Samaritan leper as one we should identify, appreciate, even imitate. While this is a healing story, it is less about overcoming the one man's disease than about overcoming our dis-ease. Our dis-ease with those we try to keep at a distance. For me, that newfound identification is the most important point of the story. What I noticed in my body is that eliminating the physical distance has the impact of eliminating our social distancing from others. This is even more effective because the narrator doesn't stand over us as judge, but moves through the surprising transformation with us. In the telling, our conventions give way to our conversion. I wanted to leave this reversal of expectations solidly in the hearts and bodies of the hearers and wondered how I could do that. The ending I found and loved was provided by a newbie storyteller, David Tietze, when he and a group of other new storytellers were playing with, improvising with the story. You saw the best recreation I can make of that movement that I took from him. It doesn't convey as well on video as it does live. Jesus bends down to the leper to help him up. But with a brilliant move, David embodied Jesus elevating the leper even above himself. To see this performed was shockingly consistent with the point Luke is making, a point that he's made at least since Mary's song about pulling down the lofty and lifting up the lowly. As I perform this dynamic in my body, I feel this reversal in my body. And I hope that every body in the audience experiences that transformation as well. Thank you.